And welcome to another episode of The Focal Thought. My guest today is Matthew Huber. How are you, Matthew?
I am doing very well. Thank you very much.
Great, great. Glad to have you on the show. Just in the way of a quick introduction, Matthew, you are trained as a biological oceanographer, and you've spent much of your life in research and development in the sciences field. You worked previously in pharmaceuticals and then shifted your focus to marine science. And you've been involved in education, teaching at Hartnell, Cuyamaca, and Miracosta colleges. And you work specifically with algae cultivation since the early 2000s. And you've done your research as well with Arthrospira platanus, which essentially is spirulina. And also in regards to algae, you're working with the biofuels aspect of it, working with corporations and with the harvesting, with the farmers as well, trying to bring algae in the form of biofuels to the commercialized market. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you summarized my my existence pretty well just then. Yeah.
Thanks, and much more to go where you're concerned, I'm sure.
I hope so.
I wanted to ask you first off. So algae is something it's sort of got a bad rep with some people. They look at it and, it's known as, the pond scum. It's the green gooky stuff that you see on maybe the glass of a fish tank, along with moss, its cousin maybe, these sort of organisms in our world. People really don't know what they're exactly about. And, something with algae, I mean, these are organisms that are, as old as 2 billion years old. There's about maybe 37,000, different species of algae. And if you go to the Vindhya Basin in India, you can find these sort of organisms dated back to about, at least a 1.5 billion years ago. So I wanted to ask you first off, what is algae from your definition?
Wow, that's a good question. It's a good place to start. Well, algae are protists generally, but algae is kind of a loose term that describes anything that can really grow underwater photosynthetically. This includes protists, which are from the kingdom Protista. They also include some cyanobacteria, which are in eubacteria and even archaebacteria. So 3 different kingdoms so far. And then if you ask my kids what they touch when they're swimming in a pond or a lake or something, even if it is a higher plant from kingdom Plantae, they'll say, "Oh, the algae touched me." So it's something that we as humans collectively call anything that grows underwater. But if you're going to be looking at the specifics, you can drill down as far as you want to go into genetics. But generally, algae is stuff that grows underwater. I think the more correct term would be something in kingdom Protista. And that's the stuff that we generally grow here in our lab, are the protists and the cyanobacteria, which are the eubacteria. Those are the ones that have really captured a lot of the imagination of scientists and kind of creative problem solvers who are looking at algae as some means to either make biofuels or to do some things to do carbon fixation from the atmosphere, to do direct carbon removal from our atmosphere, which, as you probably know, CO2 has been creeping up over the past few decades. Yes. And hopefully we can find some ways to mitigate that before it gets a little out of hand.
Got it. Okay. So would you say there's a debate maybe in the science world of algae being part of the plant kingdom or protist, or is it something that's just cut and dry?
I think to the best of my knowledge, I think that it's pretty. The term algae is one that's just a loose term to describe an aquatic plant, more or less, just because it has, and I use the term plant as well. There's always debates, but these debates usually take place in the bar over a drink. What is a plant? Is it something just photosynthetic? Does that include algae? So I've just kind of come to the term of, we'll let the genetics and the people who are doing the cladistics argue about that stuff. We just know that there's protists that grow, and then there's higher plants that grow, and I leave some of the labeling to people who are best able to do that, and that's really coming all down to genetics, which has been really a burgeoning field in the sciences lately as to what is related to each other, and the stuff they're finding out actually along with that naming convention, is really fascinating, and how different organisms are related to each other. So that's been interesting to watch. But as far as it being a heated debate, I don't know if there is one that's taking place outside of the bars.
Sure. And I like that approach you have, in terms of getting, wound up in the labeling process. Let's just get straight down to business rather than worry about the philosophical aspect of labeling.
Yeah, yeah.
No, that's good. And I mean, from looking at your website, one of the facts I saw that really astounded me was that I think it was about 50% of the oxygen that we have on the earth is contributed by algae. And I didn't know that algae is responsible for like you're saying, initially starting off underwater, but then a lot of the green plants we have on land, and then including the animals and us, that is all responsible because of algae, right? Because the algae sort of came onto the oceans and started painting the land green, and then the animals because of the plants, and us, etc. We wouldn't have been here maybe because if the algae hadn't have done that, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So, kind of working backwards working from where you guys, from where you started speaking on this. Yes, algae is responsible for more than half the world's photosynthesis, which means that I'll go down two trains of thought. If we can master algae as we mastered our terrestrial crop plants like corn, wheat, and all those fun things that feed us, we had an agricultural revolution where we were able to grow it, 200 to 300 times more productively. If we can have that same kind of an effect with algae, which I'm confident that we can do some serious removal of carbon dioxide from our atmosphere. And so that's a big part of why I do what I do. Is I see the benefit of algae as a direct air CO2 capture method. Now, to your latter point about the invasion of algae onto land, yeah, chlorophyll A and B is in all higher plants. And as it turns out, chlorophyll A and B are also in green algae, some of our more adaptable chlorophytes. And that's a division of algae that are very endemic to both freshwater and marine conditions. And so there's a lot of evidence that says that that the higher land plants all came from green algae. So yeah, and and then even from there, we have all of the lichin, which have relationships with different types of algae that are algae and fungus kind of combined all together. So, and then in a symbiotic relationship, and that helps to decompose rock that makes minerals more available for other plants and even more algae in the water. So all
Wow.
good stuff.
And that's really important to know that, everything is connected to everything in the sense that, we traditionally think with physics that, we come from the stars and, the higher cosmos, but really on Earth itself, there's also, ecosystem that we're developed from, like the main thing with physics is that all the variables have to line up perfectly for life to exist. But, on Earth as well, all of those variables had to line up, right, for us to exist. And algae is one of the main stars in the show.
Absolutely, yeah. So whether we were from the concept of, I think it's gymnospora, which is where we are a product of alien DNA, or whether we evolved here on Earth, in situ, there's no way for us to know that right offhand. But yeah, it's algae is part of that. The first organisms on Earth were photosynthetic cyanobacteria that are very similar to some of the ones that we have here in our lab. That's where life came from. That's what caused our original climate change to take place from an oxidizing atmosphere to a reducing atmosphere. And so they put all that oxygen into the atmosphere. So that's it's a big thing to keep in mind that, the physics was in place. Thank goodness we had a lot of water on our planet and we were able to develop life that algae had a big part of. The stromatoliths that they see out in Australia were some of the first cyanobacteria that are still alive even. That we saw, and those are ones that they conjecture were part of the changing of our atmosphere and putting a lot of oxygen into it.
Sure, and with algae, it can exist not only underwater, but it exists, I've heard, on ice and in places you wouldn't think about, right? So it's not just limited to underwater.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny you should say that too. So we're down here in San Diego, and there are a few trees down here. One of them is a eucalyptus tree, and I'm gonna go take a sample of one. There's algae that grows on it, so the trunk looks green. And I've gone in the past and taken a wet rag from some dew that was as I was hiking through a forest, and you can get some of the algae off that tree. And I wanted to culture it to see what it was. But the one you're talking about on the ice was one that I experienced a couple of years ago. I was hiking in the Sierras, and it is a red algae that grows. And I don't know that much about it, but I actually saw it on my own up there, and I believe it. It looks just blood red, and it's amazing, and it grows on the ice. So it's algae is in part is in every ecosystem on Earth, including, this is one that might get you here. They have stuck out from an airplane up in the high atmosphere, 30, 40,000 feet in the air, and they take an air sample, and then they plated that air sample on algae growing media. And they actually got algae to grow at the high atmosphere, which to me is like really amazing, because this might be a way that we might be able to observe algae in other planets. Think about Venus with their high atmosphere there. It'd be nice and warm at the high atmosphere, not too hot, but there would be some temperature ranges that would be good. So it's possible that you could have life on Venus in the atmosphere, in the clouds, living as algae.
Wow, so algae's in the air as well.
Yeah, algae is in the air. It's everywhere. You're breathing it in right now.
Wow. And from what we were alluding to earlier, you had mentioned, a way to sort of filter out, the excess carbon. That might be a way also, right? By maybe engineering some of the algae in the air to take care of the carbon filtration up in the atmosphere.
Well, yeah. So two different ways there. So with respect to algae growing in the air to filter out CO2, probably not as likely to happen with airborne algae growing, but there's a lot of work going on right now to come up with methods to do what's called direct air CO2 capture. And this is a big passion project of mine. It's where I'm kind of hoping to guide the folks who I met when we met you with the Garden Summit to use algae as soil amendments and for foliar application. But also I've been working a lot with AP biology teachers and high school and elementary schools down here in the States. And we're really trying to get the next generation of scientists and thinkers, and even us older folks, to really understand algae's power in being able to fix carbon dioxide into new biomass. So my personal mission is to educate people in wielding algae to fix CO2 to get it out of the atmosphere. In doing that, we can have a significant decrease in the amount of anthropogenic CO2 that is existing in the atmosphere, and then bury it or turn it into valuable products that will then be able to still pull CO2 out of the atmosphere and maybe not rely on as many fossil fuel CO2 generating materials. But, we do have a lot of surface area on our planet that's covered by water. So it just begs the question, how can we get that area to be able to produce algae that we can then take out of the ecosystem and bury it somehow? And that is, there's a lot of academic work going on it. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is putting money towards it. The former Vice President Al Gore's foundation is putting money towards it. Even Elon Musk is putting a lot of money towards direct CO2 capture as well. It's a very important thing, and we want to be there to support anybody who has any good ideas on how to do it. That's our real big mission here at Algae Research and Supply.
That's great to hear. So essentially, the algae on the water level will be filtrating the carbon on the air level, right, in the atmosphere.
Yeah, exactly. The surface layer of the ocean is at equilibrium with the atmosphere. That's kind of one of the definitions of the surface layer of the ocean. So if those algae cells can then pull in CO2 as fast as they can, and then be able to convert it into biomass, that's great. Now, the issue is if you do this in the open ocean with nothing below it, believe it or not, anything that grows in the middle of the ocean usually decomposes completely before it hits the bottom. The exception being the odd whale or something that has sunk much faster than the decomposition rates. But phytoplankton and many small fish will never make it to the bottom. They will decompose before they hit the bottom of the ocean. So that means that all those nutrients and carbon dioxide will be re-released back into the atmosphere. So it would be when we start to think about making these technologies to fix CO2, we need to find ways to remove that biomass. And as a friend of mine once said, we need to fossilize it. We need to make it so it can't be used again, and we need to bury it and make it non-usable. So this means like you could make it into some sort of a cement brick, or you can turn it into a calcium carbonate and kind of lock in that carbon inside of it. And with inside of a calcium carbonate matrix. But there's lots of different ideas that people are coming up with, but the technology has to happen for us to consider or to continue living on Earth, whether it's from algae or another source. We need to bring down CO2. Otherwise, our kids are going to have a really bad time.
No, for sure. And I like that you've highlighted, it's essentially we're using natural waste to eliminate the synthetic waste that the humans have essentially produced, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we've been targeting wastewater and dead zones and in rivers and even rivers themselves as they go out to sea. So those are great high concentrations of nutrients that algae loves to grow in. I mean, look at what happens all over the world. We've got these harmful algal blooms happening in lakes and along the shores in Florida. I mean, those are prime places to go ahead and try to pick up the algae, bring it on shore, and then process it somehow and bury the biomass so that it is not a problem and it's a net reduction in CO2. So if you're a municipality out there and you're trying to find some solutions to this stuff, give us a ring. We're looking forward to helping out.
No, definitely. And algae is sort of something that's sort of a catch-22 in the sense it's available in different colors. I believe red, blue, brown, yellow, green, and then you look at it and it doesn't look very sort of enticing or edible, but the power that it has in terms of filtration and what it's done for oxygen. And if you eat algae or drink some of the water that has heavily concentrated with algae, you can actually get sick from it, right? But then at the same token, with things like spirulina, it's actually considered a superfood. So there's this dynamic balance happening with algae, right? In terms of food and poison.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, just like, you could go into your local forest and, just randomly eat plants. You're going to not have a good time with hemlock, right? Or other stuff. But, you could go and find a Queen Anne's lace, and that's a wild carrot, right? So it's just it's the same kind of question with algae. A lot of strains of algae like chlorella and spirulina are edible, and they're considered by the U.S. EPA, not EPA, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, as generally recognized as safe grass. And those organisms are okay to eat. And many of the reasons why is that they make the water safe from pathogens. And I'll specifically talk about spirulina here because spirulina grows at pH 10. That means that most human pathogens, they can't grow that at that high of a pH, which means that spirulina is an extremophile for pH. And that allows it to grow a lot more safely. And so there's a lot of farms down here in California and actually across the United States that are growing spirulina now for human consumption in the raw state, meaning it hasn't been dried, it hasn't been cooked, it hasn't been processed. It's literally picked or screened, harvested from the water, and then packaged right up, and people are eating it. And I've got a handful of friends who are down here in New Mexico and California who are growing it and selling it, and I help them out every now and then with some advice on how to run their operations. But it's a new field as well, and this is hopefully going to get even more people thinking about algae because it can be profitable to start a farm like this. And in doing so, I'm hoping that we can get a few more people's minds changed about having it be pond scum, and then getting it converted over to be a tool for using CO2 or to sequester CO2 from the atmosphere.
Wow, that's really nice. And with algae, when you're harvesting and farming it, would you have to worry about things like, pesticides or genetically modifying it like you do with traditional farming, or this can just grow in its natural state and it's fine?
Yeah, that's great questions. So there's a couple different pushes here. So I'm a fan of just taking the algae out and and letting it grow how you want to have it grow without having genetically modified organisms. But remember how I alluded earlier, we've had the agricultural revolution, which we've gotten many hundreds of times more productivity out of our food crops. Well, the easiest and fastest tool to manipulate algae is using genetic tools. And there's some labs down here at UCSD. Steve Mayfield, who is a colleague, he's doing a lot of that genetic engineering for pharmaceuticals and for biofuels crops from algae now, and that's to be able to make them much more profitable. But for most human stuff right now, and for organisms that are going to be put out into the wild with an open pond, I'm not sure what the regulations are on that, but I think that most folks who would be doing that will be using a wild strain and not a genetically modified strain. I really don't have any opinion about it either way. I just don't want to do damage to the environment. So I think that most folks who are using GM strains or genetically modified strains are doing so responsibly and making sure that they kill everything before they waste it, which is you don't want to just dump algae down the drain if you believe it could be invasive. You want to add a little bit of that sodium hypochlorite or bleach to it to kill everything before you waste.
Sure, got it. And did you find that algae may be superior compared to a traditional plant in terms of its ability to photosynthesize and as well as filter out the oxygen? Like, would you recommend someone have an algae plant in their home just to have better quality air?
You know what? That's funny you should say that, because that's been on my mind for years. Well, there's a handful of benefits. So first off, algae is beautiful. I'm probably an outlier here for most other human beings, but I have long since wanted to come up with a handful of different tools. I read them as products that would grow algae in your home so it just looks pretty. I love it. The color that you get from it is really great. There's been a lot of evidence actually that a nice green light like that can help prevent headaches. But the neat thing is if you do bubble your air in your room through algae, you can create a significant amount of, you clean the air by having the air go through the water. But also there will be oxygen generation that takes place. Matter of fact, one of our lesson plans we do is how much is kind of couched on some International Space Station stuff. Scott Kelly, the astronaut, always would complain in space about having them turn the oxygen concentration so low. So we challenge our students that get into algae culture, given Scott Kelly's biomass, how much algae would you need to be able to supply him with oxygen? And so that is a thing. I think your pond would have to be significant to be able to have an amount of algae to support an astronaut. But there is, for your own home, there would be some air cleaning things that would take place. But I think the aesthetics would, at this point, for even a 10 to 30 gallon aquarium in your own home, it would be more aesthetics than oxygen generation per se.
Got it. Okay. No, for sure. And is algae a risk as a species? Are humans maybe doing anything to algae, or are they okay at reproducing? Or what are your thoughts on that? Like looking into the future and the evolution of algae, if any.
Oh yeah. No, I think the big things that as far as us like causing algae to go extinct anywhere, algae's endemic everywhere, and it blows on the wind and it gets transported by bird feet. And wave spray, ocean wave spray. We're several miles inland from the ocean here in Carlsbad. But if I put a saltwater plate outside opened up, I'm going to get salt strains that come in from the mist from the waves breaking on the shore. I don't think that we as a species are going to have too much of an impact on it. But with climate change, we're seeing areas of the world get hotter. And as soon as you cross that threshold above 42 degrees Celsius, that's when proteins begin to denature. So if a body of water gets over 42 degrees, you're going to kill everything in it, because the tertiary structure of the proteins there will become unconnected, and they'll turn to goo. So we can see whole swaths of land and soil and even bodies of water get so hot that will kill things in it, and that will be incredibly efficient at causing extinctions to take place. So my fingers are crossed that algae won't, because water is great with heat capacity, but it's possible that our human activities with climate change could have devastating effects on biodiversity in the algae world. And there's a lot of strains that still have yet to be described. So we may not even know if we've caused something to go extinct.
So algae really is at the mercy of the water.
It's at the mercy of the water, but if there's no more water and or the water gets hotter than 42, we're going to kill stuff.
Yeah. Does that apply for humans as well, that 42 degrees
absolutely.
and proteins that are in us? And
Yeah, that's the reason that your mom would freak out when you were younger. And here in the States, we have it at 103 degrees Fahrenheit, and I believe that's right around 42 degrees Celsius. Sorry, my conversion there, it's going down two different paths, and those units never cross, or seldom cross, although they should. That's when your mom throws you in the bathtub with ice in it when you have that really, really high temperature fever, because your human proteins will start to denature just like it will in an algae or any other organism. It's just too hot. That's when death occurs. And so that's what we're really worried about with these heat waves that go around the world. If you're above that temperature, if it's above 102, then 103 Fahrenheit, 42 Celsius, humans are in danger. And so same with plants and animals, and even animals in water, or plants in water as well, the algae. So things can go really, really badly. And that's why, climate change is such a big deal. We're warming our planet up a lot.
sure, no, and that's important, so just even if you're going to the beach for a picnic, sunscreen alone is just not going to help protect you. You have to stay cool and stay hydrated, stay in
Absolutely.
the shade as well.
Yep.
So I wanted to ask finally, so, you are involved in bringing algae as a biofuel. Is this something that's sustainable in the long run? Because, it's coming from a natural resource. And I say sustainable in terms of, using our natural resource. We should always be wary of, we're trying to advance technology and do new things, but we should not do it at the risk of depleting our natural resources, right? Because again, everything is connected. What you affect with one thing will affect the other thing, right? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's regarding algae biofuels, it's a tough thing right now because the cost to grow algae at scale isn't quite there yet to get to a couple dollars a gallon for fuel. If we're talking about fuel that's $300 to $400 US per gallon, I think we could probably make it happen. But we haven't figured out how to culture vast quantities of it enough with a high lipid content to make that profitable. That's not to say we're not there yet, but here's the thing too, and this is one of my chin scratchers, is if we're going to be growing so much algae and then we just take the CO2 from the atmosphere and turn it into new fuel, and then we just release that back into the atmosphere, yes, that is a net zero addition of carbon, but it really doesn't get the whole way there, right? We're not reducing carbon from the atmosphere. And so I think that algae biofuels might be a step forward for us to understand the technology of growing algae at scale. But for me, at least, we really need to be thinking about the bigger picture of removing CO2 from the atmosphere. And in that, having a biofuels fraction of that biomass that's produced, that would probably be good to be able to do, especially for stuff where you need a high energy density like airplanes. Thanks to a lot of entrepreneurs, the ground vehicles are leaning more towards battery and electricity. So we might be moving away from liquid fuels for ground travel, but air travel still needs that high energy density fuel supply. So that will probably be from either fossil fuels or hopefully from algae fuels for the foreseeable future, or in the future, if we're going to be going to a carbon zero type of a fuel infrastructure. Did that make sense?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think I have read that for, algae to be considered a, reliable and usable biofuel, it has to be equal to, or, beat the cost of, current level of fossil fuels, right? Just to make it worth it to bring to the commercial market and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a big struggle right now. And that's what we've been calling the green premium. And right now the green premium on algae fuel is ginormous. Solar has come down quite a bit, so that's really great. And other technologies are coming down a lot. But the green premium on algae biofuels is going to take a very long time, and there's going to need to be a lot of people involved in that, which is why I always keep my eyes on the folks who are doing direct air CO2 capture, because they're funding those things, because that's where I think the motivation is going to come in. And as a byproduct, we could make a little bit of algae biofuels that could go in and reduce that green premium. But this is going to be where we're doing, thousands of square kilometers of algae ponds somewhere to bring down CO2 in the atmosphere. And that's really going to be the only way that we can significantly reduce the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, is when we're at scale like that.
Got it. No, and you know what? That's really great that there's people like you out there doing this, at the initial stages, because it is time to start thinking about these things. And algae is something like, if some of these species, have been around for 2 billion of years, and we've only just started to shine the flashlight on them, it's like, where have you been all my life kind of sentiment. And I don't blame people
to my
because
flasks of algae every morning. I look down there and where have you been all my life, you green little beastie in there?
I don't blame people just because of the appearance. I too would just, glance over it. But now after, listening to you and, getting a little bit more in depth, the next time I'm hiking, I'm not going to just glance over that algae that I see in the pond. I'm going to, take note and maybe, send a note of gratitude, for being here, because algae was here. So that's really great. And if people want to get a hold of you or find out more about your research and your work, where's the best place to reach you for that?
Yeah. They can find us on our website, Algae Research, it's algaeresearchsupply.com. The company is called Algae Research and Supply Incorporated. We've now formed an S corp here in the States, which is very exciting. But yeah, so we're down here in San Diego. You can give us a call at area code 760 483-3626, 760-483-3626. Or just email us at matthew@algaeresearchsupply.com. We're here. We really want to encourage people to take chances, grow some algae. We've got all sorts of little kits you can grow. We try to keep a lot of them at $20 so that people can get them and bring them home and play with them. We want you to, our goal here for the United States and Canada is to have every student be able to grow algae before they leave high school, or at least to have tried it. Why? Because we need to inspire the next generation of people who are going to do that hard science. And also, and this is the worst case scenario, we want to create voters that are going to be voting for science and voting for doing something about climate change. And that's our goal. Get your hands green and vote like you should. Vote for the earth.
No, that's great. And, that really preaches sustainability, which means we can all enjoy the earth, including our future generations for billions of years to come. Maybe we'll be here longer than the algae. Who knows?
I think that would be an aspirational thing, but I think we probably can. But I think the algae is going to outlive all of us.
Fair enough. Thanks again for the show. And I'll put all of that contact information in the show notes as well.
You're awesome. Thanks so much for the interview. I really appreciate it. Good luck with your podcast, and send us an email anytime.
Pleasure. Thanks, Matthew.
All right. Cheers.